Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm a founder and director at Fortuna Admissions, which is a boutique MBA admissions consulting firm. So excited to have with us today Cassandra Pittman. Cassandra has both an MBA from Columbia Business School, has worked as an assistant director at INSEAD, as well as an admissions officer at London Business School. So she's one of our expert coaches. She brings an incredible depth of knowledge, not just about the schools that she's been to or has worked for, but about the admissions process as a whole. Thank you so much for joining us, so thank you. Wanted to talk a little bit today about a question that we get a lot on our webinars, and that's about age, chronological age, and when is considered too old to apply, when is not old enough to apply, and then as an ancillary question, how does that impact the classroom dynamic? I think that when I was at Wharton, and I'm sure when you were at LBS and at INSEAD, you talked an awful lot about is 28, 29, 30, where does that fit? What about 22, 23? And then from your CBS experiences, how did that impact the classroom for you as well? So if you wanted to take a stab a little bit at how age was considered during the admissions discussions.
Yeah, so I think there are two main things to look at on the admissions side when it comes to age. One is, they're looking for people who have a high potential. So if you have been working for 15, 20 years and haven't quite achieved your potential, let's say, it's hard to make the case that you really are a high potential, right? And that you belong in this group. And so I would think of it less about age and more about work experience. So if you went off and were in the Army for a couple of years and then got some business experience and you're a little bit older, I think admissions committees really like to see that. But if you've just kind of gotten yourself into low middle management after 20 years, then it's hard to make the case that you're really a high potential. The other thing to consider is, are your career objectives realistic given your age? So, for example, I was 30 when I started CBS. I was 32, I think, when I graduated, just about to turn 32, and I went into consulting. And that was great, but my peers who were making exactly the same amount of money as me were sometimes 26, also just graduates from full-time MBA programs. And, I had a lot more experience than them, and I was a bit older than them, and they were suddenly my peers. And that was okay for me, but that's something that people have to really consider. Had I been, 5 or 10 years older, I'm not sure that same consulting firm would have hired me. They would have had concerns about my fit in that role in the organization. So I think those are two things to think about.
And certainly when you're coming in sort of earlier in your career, and that's something we counsel students all the time, I'm a couple of years out, I want to either leave my job or I want an MBA, I'm not quite sure. Sometimes I would say to them, well, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to give as much as you get out of the program. So if you haven't had that leadership experience, or you haven't had a lot of mentoring, opportunities, you're going to get a lot, but you need to make sure that you're going to be giving back to your classmates. So, right. To kind of address that, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, they do have the 2+2 program that kind of allow you to mature a little bit and gain that that professional experience before coming back for an MBA. But it's interesting, this time of year we do talk to a lot of people that are planning out already a couple of years in advance and how to talk them through making, like, when is the right time to apply. The other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that some schools are notorious for looking at students sort of that are a little bit older and are not concerned about that. When I was at Wharton, the average entering age was 27, so it was skewing a little bit higher than some of the other programs that we would also see cross candidates for, as well as thinking about the executive program. So it gets to a point where if you've had a lot of experience and you're sort of in your early 30s, maybe the 2-year model isn't going to work for you. And maybe it's a great idea to do an executive program every other weekend, et cetera.
Right, and it's two thoughts on that. One is that it's as much about your peer group, right? And you mentioned you need to be able to give to that group, and you also want to receive from that group. And if you are in your mid-30s or early 40s, you're probably going to find that you have more to both give and get from an older cohort, right? And so, and the network is, in my view, is at least half the value of an MBA. The second point is, again, and particularly for people who are on the younger side and maybe a little bit anxious to get into business school, what I used to always counsel people when I was at INSEAD, and now when people come to me at Fortuna, is I say, when you're working, when you first start working, the learning curve is really steep, and there's a number of years that every year you're growing and you're learning, and it's like, and then at some point you realize it just starts to tack off a little bit, and you think,
Right.
okay, now I'm a little bit plateauing, and how am I growing and learning? That's the time to start applying for your MBA. If you're still learning and growing at this pace, take a few more years, learn and grow, so that you have, like you said, something to give, and also, a better plateau to jump off your MBA program from.
And I think, again, that's definitely relevant this time of year when people, it's sort of May, June seems to be a big shift.
Yeah.
It's not so much the beginning of the year, January, as it is now, because everybody knows that the application deadlines are sort of September, October.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about this really important topic today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And look forward to speaking with you again soon. And certainly anyone else, we have a lot of other topics going on throughout the course of the coming weeks, so we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.